It was a fairy tale on ice as 16-year-old Oksana Baiul skated onto the world stage. Hundreds of millions of people watched her at the 1994 Winter Olympics, where she became the youngest figure skating champion in 60 years. Her victory capped an incredible story of a poor orphan from the former Soviet Empire who had come from nothing to miraculously win it all.
Oksana, it's rags to riches. There's no doubt about that, a rags to riches story.
How did an adolescent girl without parents or a coach become a world champion figure skater by the time she was 16? Oksana Baiul's road to the top was filled with tremendous obstacles. However, those who have reported her story don't always agree on the details.
It's been difficult to get an accurate story on her life because she doesn't even know the accurate story.
Her life after the Olympics, however, became an open book. Her gold medal instantly transformed her into a media princess in the land of opportunity.
I changed my home. I feel United States is my second home. So everything changed in my life.
But her newfound fame soon had this teenage Cinderella spinning out of control. Just 3 years after her historic Olympic triumph, Oksana's life almost came to a crashing end.
The car was completely totaled, and there was a blood trail from the driver's seat out the back door of the vehicle.
Lots of money, lots of free time, a very young girl, not well educated, in a new country. Boy, is that a deadly mix.
In the coming hour, we will reveal the complete story behind Oksana Baiul's astonishing rise from Ukrainian orphan to Soviet skating star to gold medal champion. And we'll examine the fall that threatened to destroy everything she achieved. You will hear about Oksana from world-class skaters such as Scott Hamilton and Brian Boitano.
I want to help her. The only thing that I care about is that she is happy and healthy and okay with her life.
I think the transition has been tough for her, from amateur to professional.
You'll see her amazing skating performances. And you'll get an inside look at her win over America's sweetheart, Nancy Kerrigan, in one of the closest decisions in Olympic history. This is a Cinderella story woven from the fact and fiction of a dramatic young life that's seen hardship, triumph, and a near brush with disaster. This is the story of Oksana Baiul, the true Hollywood story. Born in 1977, 500 miles south of Moscow, in the Ukrainian city of Dnepropetrovsk. At the time, it was still part of the Soviet Union. Biographies have given different versions of Oksana's childhood. Linda Shaughnessy encountered those alternate explanations when she researched her book on Oksana's life.
There's a story that her father died when she was 2, and also that he didn't die, that he left the family, that there was a divorce or a separation, perhaps that he was alcoholic.
Oksana's version, as told in her autobiography, states that her father left when she was 2, and that she was raised by her mother, Marina, and her maternal grandparents. Marina was a French teacher and former ballet dancer. She longed for her daughter to become a ballerina. But when Oksana was just 4 years old, she seemed too heavy to be a graceful dancer.
Her grandfather brought home a pair of skates and said, well, let her skate. And she started skating and loved it.
From the start, Oksana's natural talent was noticed by the local ice skating rink's top teacher, Stanislav Korotek. With his support, she was able to get state-of-the-art training, all at the expense of the Soviet government. It was a far cry from the abject poverty image makers later would write into her story of those years. Oksana won the first competition she entered and became a promising potential star by the time she turned 7. No longer a chubby, awkward child, Oksana was thin and graceful, and she could take her pick between ballet or skating. She chose skating, but kept her mother's dream of ballet alive by mixing dance classes with her training on the ice. Oksana said the combination gave her a unique style.
When I was in Ukraine, I have almost every day ballet class. It took like every day. And I think it's really helped me because I skate a lot of numbers, you know, and then people come to me and tell to me like, I'm skate like little ballerina. I like it when people say to me like that.
Her future seemed bright. Her mother, her grandparents, and rich Soviet athletic programs all supported her dreams of skating glory. But Oksana's world was soon to shatter, and harsh reality would hurt more than any fiction. In 1989, the Soviet Union began to break apart, and money for sports quickly vanished. But much worse for Oksana. During that same time, within the short space of a year, both of her grandparents died. The sadness ended briefly when Oksana's mother remarried. Oksana has said that during those preteen years, she was happy again, living with her mother and new stepfather. But tragically, that happiness was not to last.
When she was 13, they suddenly found out that her mother had ovarian cancer, and her mother had been trying, apparently, to sort of hide it from her, not let Oksana worry about her mother not feeling well.
Her mother's condition was much worse than Oksana had believed, and at age 36, Marina Baiul lost her battle with cancer, leaving her 13-year-old daughter with a stepfather she barely knew. Young Oksana tried to conquer her sadness through skating. She threw herself even more deeply into her training and became closer to Coach Korotek. But even that refuge was about to disappear.
Her coach that had her most of her career, Stanislav Korotek, he moved to Canada shortly after her mother had died. So this is a girl with no stability in her life at all.
Although she lived with her stepfather, Oksana has said she felt orphaned, abandoned, and heartbroken. She threw away her skates and vowed never to take the ice again. Coming up on the E! True Hollywood Story, Oksana grows up and moves on.
As I walked in the rink, I heard all this buzz about this new young Ukrainian girl, and she was wonderful.
And later, success on the ice results in problems off it.
They saw her not skating well.
Her father, and by the time she was 13, the deaths of her grandparents and her mother in quick succession robbed her of her only family. The one constant in her life was skating. But now, with no relatives and the relocation of her coach from the Ukraine to Canada, Oksana felt truly alone. In her autobiography, Oksana states that her decision to give up skating because of the death of her mother and the loss of her coach was short-lived. She was back on the ice in 3 weeks, but her return was not easy. She finished 12th at the Soviet Championships that winter. Her performance convinced her to make a change. She moved 250 miles away to the Ukrainian city of Odessa in hopes of training with world-famous figure skating coach Galina Smievskaya.
There's just many, many contradictions. And the biggest one of all, perhaps, is how she met Galina Smievskaya and came to be coached by her.
For years, Oksana's move to Odessa and her meeting with the famed Soviet skating coach were the stuff of legend. In one fabled account, Oksana traveled to Odessa and was sleeping in the basement of an ice rink when she was discovered by Galina's star pupil, Viktor Petrenko, the men's figure skating gold medalist at the 1992 Winter Olympics. But in her autobiography, Oksana put that myth to rest. She wrote that she actually stayed with friends until she got the chance to audition.
Only through the kindness of strangers and friends did she even get a chance to move on at all in the sport.
The great Galina was impressed with the young prodigy and asked Oksana to move in with her family. Coach Linda Lever has known Galina for many years.
I think what she did for Oksana was remarkable. She took Oksana, a young orphan, into her home and raised her as her daughter, provided for her monetarily, emotionally, and supported her skating.
While Galina took on the role of coach and surrogate mother, Viktor Petrenko, her star skater, took Oksana under his wing as well.
I can just tell about you one word. He is my brother. It's everything for me. Victor, he is everything for me.
The two skaters became inseparable on and off the ice.
And he gave for me everything. He sent to me boots, blades for my skating, dresses, everything, clothes, money, everything he gave for me. Thank you for him.
Oksana may have had the best teachers, but the conditions in Odessa and at the rink where she trained were terrible. Sports Illustrated reporter Ed Swift saw the conditions for himself.
That city was very poor at that time, having trouble getting electricity. Galina was telling me that at the rink, they constantly were having to run the Zamboni themselves, or the Zamboni wouldn't work and they'd have to shovel the ice themselves.
The conditions were not the only hurdles. Galina's rigorous training regimen was equally challenging. She is credited with creating Oksana's trademark spin. And it took 2 months before Oksana could curve her body and stretch her left leg behind her head far enough to grab the skate.
She's an amazing spinner. Without her flexibility, with the added flexibility, it's unbelievable. I believe she's actually missing one vertebra, which makes it a little easier for her, so I don't think every young skater should try it. But it's beautiful to watch.
The unusual spin helped Oksana win the Ukrainian National Championship in 1992. And soon after, at the European Championships, she astounded everyone by placing second. Suddenly, she was among the top skaters in the world.
She was somebody that we in America didn't know what to expect. And then once, of course, we saw her, she was the real thing. It was very obvious, very apparent.
Prague in the Czech Republic was the site for the 1993 World Championships, where the world got a closer look at the young talent.
As I walked in the rink, I heard all this buzz about this new young Ukrainian girl, and she was wonderful. And as usual, I thought to myself, oh well, the buzz is a lot greater than the skater. And when I saw her, my mouth just flew open and I was spellbound. She was much, much better than anyone could even express to me.
When Oksana took the ice with her special blend of ballet and figure skating, everyone was in awe, including American promoter Tom Collins.
I went to Prague and saw this little tiny girl with skates that were not the best, costume just pieced together, skate a routine that I get goosebumps thinking about it now. She was one in a million, no question about it. She was just fabulous.
Her grace and talent shocked her rivals, thrilled the audience, and won over the judges. And at the age of 15, Oksana Baiul became the youngest world champion in modern figure skating. Story continues. The reigning world champion arrives at an Olympic Games embroiled in controversy.
Good or bad for the parties involved, Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. That whole incident put ice skating on the map.
And later, the teenage millionaire nearly loses her life. Made an astonishing leap from unknown to world champion. The only prize with more prestige was an Olympic gold medal, and she would get her chance to go for the gold at the 1994 Winter Games. The world title that Oksana won in 1993 earned her a spot on a tour of the United States, where the first stop was Las Vegas. The Ukrainian teenager quickly fell in love with the lights and glitter of the Western world. Audiences were equally taken with the newcomer, and her performances often brought down the house. Fellow skater, Olympic gold medalist Brian Boitano was among those cheering loudest.
She had little dough legs, but she was able to perform all these things, and her body, it was just so fluid and beautiful. It was almost like watching an adult spirit in a little girl's body, and it was haunting in a way, but just refreshing and wonderful in another way.
Following that American tour, Oksana went to the ski resort town of Sun Valley, Idaho, to perform and prepare for the upcoming season that would climax with the 1994 Winter Olympics. In Sun Valley, Oksana said she saw several swans swimming on a pond. The sight gave her the idea for her skating trademark, the Swan Lake routine. Swan Lake had a special place in Oksana's heart because it was her late mother's favorite ballet. So Oksana and her coach, Galina Smievskaya, went back to the Ukraine to create a skating program that had never been seen before. Part of that Swan Lake program would include Oksana skating on her toes like a ballerina, a feat no other skater had successfully performed. Skating expert Dick Button, a gold medalist himself, describes how Oksana mastered the difficult maneuver.
She started out wanting to be a dancer, and she had the body for it. And so that sensitivity of understanding dance, particularly classical dance, carried over into her skating.
Learning to skate on the tips of her toes left Oksana in so much pain that she could hardly walk. But after weeks of excruciating pain and practice, the mix of ballet and acrobatic skating began to come together. Skating reporter Ed Swift watched Oksana with her coach.
The ballet training is a learned skill. For Oksana, it was very natural. And Galina, her coach, used to talk about this. She would say, instead of go, Oksana, skate, do a double axel, she would say, Oksana, go skate like a butterfly. And Oksana would do it. And I asked Galina about this, and she said, it all comes from within. This is not something I can teach.
While Oksana was quietly perfecting her moves in the Ukraine, one of the most bizarre events in the history of figure skating made headlines thousands of miles away at the U.S. Olympic trials in Detroit. The world was shocked when American Nancy Kerrigan, one of Oksana's chief rivals for the Olympic gold, was brutally attacked.
And 3 others have been arrested.
The ice rinks became a media circus when the assault was linked to rival Tonya Harding's husband and her bodyguard. A skating champion from an earlier era, Dorothy Hamill, was stunned to see the storm of coverage.
Good or bad for the parties involved, Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan, that whole incident put ice skating on the map. I think it was the first time people realized that skaters aren't the women and aren't just these ice princesses or ice people that do everything perfect all the time.
As Nancy Kerrigan struggled to recover and Tonya Harding fought to stay eligible to skate in the Winter Games, their soap opera saga aimed an astonishing swirl of attention on the upcoming Olympic competition. Meanwhile, far away from the media frenzy, Oksana was quietly perfecting her routines. When the Winter Games finally began in February of 1994, the eyes of the world were on tiny Lillehammer, Norway. The largest television audience in Olympic history tuned in to watch the women's short program, the first stage of the figure skating competition. Here in a 1995 performance, we see a similar Swan Lake routine to the one Oksana first unveiled at the Olympics. She finished the short program in second place, behind Nancy Kerrigan.
The short program is essentially a technical program. And Nancy Kerrigan was a better technical skater than Oksana Baiul. So she won the short program, and she should have won it, but it wasn't a huge surprise. The long program is really more of an artistic program. I mean, that's the tie-breaking mark.
With the gold medal hanging in the balance, the skaters had a practice day before the long program that would decide the winner. Preparing for the biggest moment of her life, disaster suddenly struck Oksana and almost shattered her dream. She was skating at high speed, getting ready for a jump, when she collided hard with another skater. The blade of the competitor's skate dug deep into Oksana's leg. Reporter Christine Brennan witnessed the accident.
It happened right in front of me, and the thud of the 2 bodies hitting each other was just extraordinary and extremely scary. And Oksana was in bad shape and needed some painkillers.
With the whole world waiting and watching for the biggest event in ice skating history, Oksana was only able to hope she could recover fast enough to take her shot at Olympic gold.
When something traumatic happens to your body, like a slash on the leg or something, it's like all of your energy goes to that point to, you know, to heal it. And it's really hard to have the energy.
Just one day before the biggest moment of her life, the pain from that freak accident was about to destroy Oksana's dream and her years of hard work. Continues, Olympic gold seems so close, yet so far away, as Oksana tries to fight back from her injuries.
In the morning of the long program,
For the biggest event in ice skating history, Oksana was only able to hope she could recover fast enough to take her shot at Olympic gold.
I think if you have a slip disc and stitches, either one of those would keep a lesser person out. What you have to understand is most of these athletes got there because they are elite athletes and they skate through a lot of pain.
The untimely skating accident during practice left Oksana with 3 stitches in her leg and a slipped disc in her back. The night of the long program, the Olympic Committee approved 2 injections of Novocaine to ease Oksana's pain. During the warm-up period, her coach was shocked as Oksana skated onto the ice and landed all of her jumps.
The one thing in her favor and in a lot of these athletes' favor is that when they get in a pressure situation, especially the Olympics, their adrenaline is running so high, and that's a painkiller. It's one of the most effective painkillers.
The successful warm-up showed there was still a chance to win a medal if Oksana could hold off the pain and if she could stay focused. Reporter Ed Swift watched the drama unfold.
We'd been worried about Nancy's health for all those months. And then all of a sudden, the morning of the long program, Oksana Baiul's health became a major concern.
As Oksana waited alone in the locker room, Nancy Kerrigan skated a crowd-pleasing performance similar to the one shown here. But the scoring left room at the top for Oksana if she could skate the program of her life. The next 4.5 minutes would be the most critical moments in her 16 years. Oksana skated into her first jump, landed it perfectly, and the crowd roared. This later performance typified the artistry she showed at the Olympics, and to which she would forever be linked. Knowing that Kerrigan's marks were strong, Oksana made a quick decision to improvise on the ice. Under incredible pressure, she added difficult jump combinations to score extra points. Former gold medalist Brian Boitano admired her strategy.
Oksana did this thing where she went out and she was gutsy and she kept throwing things in until she knew she had enough. You know, it was a gutsy thing to do, and she skated with a lot of charisma.
As the judges made their decisions, suspense hung in the cold air of the rink and around the world. The scoring was so close that many people thought Nancy Kerrigan had won. But when all the numbers were tallied, Oksana had won the gold medal by the slimmest of margins, 1/10 of a point. Controversy quickly followed.
Not to say that Oksana didn't deserve that Olympic gold medal. She is a beautiful artist, a skater for the ages, at least we thought back then. But Nancy Kerrigan did much more that night. Nancy Kerrigan, in my opinion, won the Olympic gold medal and was robbed of the Olympic gold medal.
I might have given it to Nancy because I think she was very clean that night and completed everything, and her jumps were really superb. But, you know, that's what figure skating is all about. The competitions get very close, and unless you're miles ahead of somebody else, there will always be a little bit of quibbling.
Could have gone either way, almost did go either way. Shouldn't have been the cause for the bitterness that it was in the American camp, because it was legitimately a very close competition.
On the night of Oksana's historic Olympic victory, the audience waited restlessly while the medal ceremony was delayed. Oksana's triumph marked the first time the Ukrainian anthem was ever played at the Olympics.
They had to wait around for about a half hour backstage, wondering what's going on. They don't know that they don't have the anthem for the Ukraine. Obviously, they would have had it for the United States, but now Oksana's won, so they've got to find the anthem, the flag, and the whole bit.
When the Ukrainian anthem was finally played, Oksana touched the gold medal around her neck and said a silent prayer for her mother. She was 16 years old and her dream had come true. Having accomplished her goal at such a young age, the question was, where would Oksana go from there? Money and fame become Oksana's instant rewards.
Winning a gold medal changes your life drastically and completely.
And later, Oksana and her surrogate mother, Galina Smievskaya, come to a crossroads in their relationship.
She had some problems with Galina, and she lost her commitment and her focus to skate.
Years, Oksana Baiul leaped from complete obscurity to center stage. Her gold medal at the 1994 Winter Games capped years of personal heartache and showered her with instant fame and fortune.
After Olympic Games, everything changed.
Her Olympic victory made Oksana one of the most sought-after skaters in the world. Her talent on the ice, coupled with her rags-to-riches story, attracted lucrative offers that made her a millionaire virtually overnight. Olympic gold medalist Brian Boitano understood the pressure.
Winning a gold medal changes your life drastically and completely. People, the day before you, they don't know who you are, and then people know who you are after. It's dramatic, and it's difficult. I thought I was young at 24.
At the tender age of 16, Oksana's world had turned upside down. The gold medal translated into instant celebrity status. The attention that went with it was often overwhelming.
Every time she went out, it didn't matter if she was doing an exhibition or a competition, one of these pro competitions, she felt the weight of that gold medal. So that gold medal was a real mixed blessing for Oksana Baiul.
Oksana became a headliner in the highly successful Champions on Ice tour. The tour, featuring the finest skaters in the world, performed 75 shows in a 3-month period. The grueling schedule proved to be a difficult adjustment.
You know, sometimes I read back after exhibition, bad exhibition, when I have bad mood, I'm like, tell to Maya, to my best friend, Maya, I'm so sick and tired
But on the ice, Oksana continued to dazzle her fans before one sellout crowd after another. Mike Berg, another top American promoter, noticed the reaction.
Oksana is able to turn a crowd on. She's able to make them cry. She's able to make them laugh. She's able to make every guy's eyes go wide open. She's a tremendous actress on the ice.
Her charm and charisma showed in her portrayal of Clara in the 1994 television production of the Christmas classic, The Nutcracker. She appeared in the ensemble cast with her mentor, Victor Petrenko. Life in the fast lane rarely slowed down. Between skating shows, Oksana juggled numerous other projects. She developed her own line of skating wear, promoted a line of jewelry called Ice Crystals, and even co-wrote a pair of autobiographies. Her face adorned the cover of dozens of magazines, and she was the subject of hundreds of articles. The public display allowed Americans to see Oksana evolving from a wide-eyed little girl to a young adult.
She is uninhibited, and she likes to dye her hair, shocking shades of yellow or white, or who knows what she'll look like this year. And she likes to wear provocative outfits, and she is a very sexy young woman and doesn't mind flaunting it.
Oksana seemed to enjoy the transformation. Her spiraling salary allowed her to go on shopping sprees, purchasing a $500,000 Connecticut home and a $100,000 Mercedes. And her closet was filled with designer dresses.
She wanted a lot of things. She never had anything in her life, and she finally had some money that she could actually go and do with what she wanted to do with it.
But her fairy tale life was not without problems. Early on the professional tour, Oksana suffered a devastating knee injury at a performance in Sun Valley, Idaho. Instead of letting the injury heal properly, Oksana continued to perform in show after show.
She had some competitions to do and get ready for, and they were big money competitions, and she thought maybe she should do them. In hindsight, she shouldn't have.
The knee injury was not Oksana's only physical problem. Her once petite 5-foot figure added several inches and pounds in the year following her Olympic victory. Her growth made the execution of difficult moves even harder.
I think Oksana's growth spurt hurt her skating, but it would hurt anybody skating. And it's unfortunate, I guess, that the growth spurt came when people were looking at her so closely.
The physical setbacks took a toll on Oksana, who was learning to deal with her problems publicly and in a new country. She had settled into an affluent community outside of Hartford, Connecticut, along with coach Galina Smievskaya and Victor Petrenko, to train at a new state-of-the-art facility. Still a teenager, she was faced with difficult decisions, without a parent to guide her, and often without any adult supervision at all.
I think she's very afraid in some ways. And I think she probably should be. I mean, she's been thrust into a position and having to make decisions not in her own country, not in her own language, and in a world that she didn't grow up in.
As the novelty of wealth and fame wore off, Oksana was left to deal with a growing list of problems. Friends noticed the pressure mounting on her shoulders.
Being a headliner and being young, and going on the road, and not really coming from any family, not having a family atmosphere anywhere, it would be really tough. It would be really tough to handle.
Her Cinderella dreams had become reality, but the real world was not a fantasy guaranteed to have a happy ending. Continues, Oksana loses her focus, loses her mentors, and almost loses her life.
I think Victor...
Oksana Baiul won an Olympic gold medal. By 19, she was struggling with the privileges and pressures of stardom while growing up without parents in a new country.
The public, the people cheering their brains out in arenas around America, around the world actually, for Oksana Baiul. had no idea what was going on. They saw her not skating well, but they never said, well, this is a girl in trouble.
Fans continued to cheer for Oksana, even though she seemed to have lost some of her gracefulness on the ice. Skating insiders say the crowd could not see what was happening backstage, that Oksana could not be told what to do, and that she often seemed more interested in shopping and partying than practicing. Brian Boitano noticed the problems while choreographing his show, Skating Romance with Oksana.
Well, she didn't show up for the rehearsals. She was gone. We couldn't find her for a while. And the lighting man was so frustrated with her that he threw his headset down because she criticized him, and the other skaters were just like shaking their heads.
On January 13th, 1997, the world finally found out what many in the skating community already knew, that Oksana was spinning out of control. In the wee hours of the morning, following an evening out drinking with friends in the local bars of Hartford, Connecticut, Oksana got behind the wheel of her new model Mercedes. Despite being underage, Oksana was served several Long Island iced teas, a potent cocktail mix of 5 different alcohols. Oksana and skater friend Ari Zakarian then decided to head home. The speed limit was 45 miles per hour. But Oksana's car was traveling nearly 100 miles per hour when she lost control of it. Police reports said her car skidded off a 2-lane country highway and into a bank of trees. Tow truck driver Kurt Nelligan arrived on the scene soon after the accident.
The car was completely totaled. There wasn't a decent body panel on the vehicle. The exit, where they exited out of the vehicle was out of the right rear door because the front seat broke back and there was a blood trail from the driver's seat out the back door of the vehicle.
Nearby residents who heard the crash called 911. Paramedics quickly arrived on the scene to find Oksana delirious and her head bleeding badly. She required 12 stitches to close the gash in her scalp and suffered a concussion. But tests at the hospital revealed a far more serious problem. Oksana's blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit for adults in Connecticut, 8 times the legal limit for minors.
The same recklessness that she shows on the ice, or unafraidness that she shows on the ice, she carries that over into her personal life. And she, as a result, has gotten herself into some situations.
2 days after the accident, police arrested Oksana on charges of driving under the influence and reckless driving. She was sentenced to community service and mandatory attendance at an alcohol education class.
I think it opened her eyes, you know, and made her think a lot more about a lot of things. Her life, this kind of lifestyle she leads, and who her friends are, and who she is more now than before.
The drunk driving incident was not the end of Oksana's troubles. Her increasingly destructive lifestyle had strained already tender relations with coach Galina Smievskaya and skater Viktor Petrenko, her Ukrainian mentors who had come to America with her. The two reportedly were frustrated with Oksana, who had not been responding well to any kind of authority.
She went through some personal rebellion. She had some problems with Galina, and she lost her commitment and her focus to skating.
Things came to a boiling point a couple of months after the accident, when Oksana decided to stop training altogether with Galina and Viktor. At the time of the split, Oksana was barely on speaking terms with the people she had often publicly referred to as her mother and brother. She put her home up for sale and began looking for a new coach and a new identity.
She's obviously had a problem relating now to Galina. And that's unfortunate. But she is 18 or 19, and, you know, there's no mother or father there whom you have to listen to.
I think Viktor saw Oksana moving down a path that he thought she probably shouldn't be moving down. I think he opened his mouth and told her a few things, and as I understand it, she didn't want to hear that.
In addition to her car accident and her breakup with Galina, Oksana also had to deal with a growing debate about her decision not to defend her title at the 1998 Olympics.
She could have still continued to make money and gone back to the Olympic side. She did not do that because she didn't want the heavy lifting.
I don't think Oksana would prove anything by going back to Olympic Games, and I think she's won her Olympic gold medal. Where do you go from there?
With her gold medal in hand and hopefully her troubles behind, 19-year-old Oksana Baiul left Connecticut and closed yet another chapter in her young and hectic life. In the summer of 1997, she moved to Boston and began training at a new rink and with a new coach, former Soviet trainer Edward Kleiner. With her new coach, Oksana tried to focus on her lifetime passion for skating in front of audiences. But would fans forget her problems and fall in love with her all over again? There was only one place to find the answer: on the ice. Oksana Baiul captivated skating fans around the world. But the fairy tale story of a poor orphan who became an Olympic champion seemed to get lost as her personal and professional life became marred in controversy. At the beginning of 1998, Oksana tried to put her troubles behind her when she returned to the professional ice skating circuit. The story of Oksana's young life has never lacked drama. She has survived hardships and personal losses that few others could ever understand.
She may be a young person in years, but she's old in experience, and she's been through things that I'm twice her age and haven't lost the people in my life that she has lost. And so she is an interesting, fascinating, really, combination of youth and uninhibitedness and experience and wisdom through her suffering.
Her past has been marked by dramatic ups and downs, while her future place in ice skating remains uncertain.
What's happening to Oksana is she's in danger of becoming the answer to a trivia question. Who did win that Olympic gold medal in 1994? And people are going to sit there going, yeah, who was that person? That is a shame for a woman who could have been one of the most legendary skaters of all time.
Oksana hasn't anywhere come near reaching her potential. I mean, she could go on to be one of the great skaters of all time if she had the desire to do so.
The loss of her family, a move to a new country, and even a near-fatal car accident did not deter Oksana. Through it all, Oksana continued to perform.
She's got so many things about her that are natural. Certain ways she moves her head, certain ways she moves her hands, certain ways she connects with an audience are all things that you can't teach. And she's really amazing in that way.
She has the heart and soul on the ice that expands through the entire Coliseum. It fills the whole room. And I think that that's what people like watching about her.
Oksana grabs your heart when she skates. She's like a poem on the ice.
She can't make an awkward move. It's impossible for Oksana to do that. She's so special. And just the skaters have a hard time with that. It comes natural to Oksana Baiul.
The road to Olympic gold was filled with struggle and heartache for Oksana Baiul. The path she ultimately chooses to take is yet to be determined. But whatever happens, she will be guided by one unescapable truth.
I like figure skating so much. Figure skating, it's my life, you know.
I'm gonna throw her into a triple axel now. No.